guys, so we're going to jump into flesh tones today. I'm going to pull my colors up from my tabletop palette down here and put them so you can see it. And we're going to go in here and tile some of the flesh tones in. So the basic flesh palette, the classical one, is white, a muted yellow, so we've got yellow ochre, a strong red, classically vermilion. More common today is cadmium red light, or naphthol red. I'm using cad red regular. I like the student grade version. Let's see, the difference is real quick. So this would be the regular kind of artist oils, and then this is the student one. Same pigments, they just add filler to these. I think Gamblin, everyone does it differently, but Gamblin uses chalk dust. And chalk dust is semi-transparent, so actually it makes what would be a cadmium very opaque. It makes it a little bit translucent, so it knocks down the strength of it. So we still get the bright red quality of this for some of the warm undertones, but it's not going to overpower. A lot of people love using vermilion, the classical bright red, because it's not as strong. So using the student grade cad red makes it not as strong. And then some sort of blue or black. Kind of the classic flesh tone would be like just a straight black. I'm going to use blue black, just so it's a little bit cooler, so I can push my shadows a little bit cooler. You can either mix ultramarine blue with ivory black, use ivory black by itself because it's a pretty cool black, or I like Payne's gray. And that's your classical kind of standard flesh palette. In class we were going to do a chart of it. It's actually hanging up in the classroom to show you the whole range that can encompass, which is quite a bit. You know, this is the brightest color on there, saturation and chroma wise, but these ones can still get you a lot of variety in your violets. While still muted, they'll still be pretty saturated, especially for a portrait. We don't need super vibrant purples. And then it'll get you some strong oranges and then some kind of muted greens, which, you know, I don't need anything too strong. Now, like colors like that, I couldn't get. That's why I have the Indian yellow. So I have kind of, when I paint more than just the face, I like to extend my palette a little bit. We talked about this Indian yellow. I don't think I'll be using too much of this stuff today. I will try and stick to these guys for you, just to keep it simple. But I like to just bump up my chroma there. And then I'm also thinking, again, how that was a transparent color, so that's an opaque color. So I have an opaque yellow and a transparent yellow. I have that opaque red, and I like that same transparent red. These are just kind of my additions, or I call it the enhanced flesh palette. And then, remember, so we use these three transparents, and so I like to have an opaque blue. Technically, you can think of white as a really light blue because it has some coolness to it, but I just like this really pale opaque blue, either like a king's blue or this is a radiant blue. It's just ultramarine and white. The idea there is I have a light and dark of each color, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, so I can still think in value, right? Because this was the value under sketch. Now we're going to go into the subtleties of the trying to keep the value as we tile around and we add color or hue. But just for ease of mixing, I like to have my lights and darks. So if I want to lighten my blue without just doling it, I can lighten it with that, and so it stays with relatively the same chroma. Okay? So let's get into it. So I like to start in just like we started in the biggest areas, I like to start kind of with the biggest masses. Sometimes it's nice to start down in here where the accuracy is not as important to the overall success of the painting. So I think that would be a good place to start, just because I can demonstrate a big, wide range of value and tiling using a band of tiles, creating the form. So let's start there. And remember, we're using this underpainting as a value map. So I'm going to go in and try and match the values I have, and probably continue to look at my reference and try and better or more accurately push my reference. But this is just going to give me a leg up in that direction. And I usually like to start with the shadows, especially if you're working on like a white paper or a white canvas. You want to kind of lay down your shadows first, and then turn out of that, because you're covering up as much of that white canvas as possible. That's the other great thing about having this toned underpainting, is I've covered up most of the white, so as I'm putting tiles down and moving this way, it's not in the center of a white canvas, and what happens then is it makes it look super dark. Like that line looks a lot darker because it's surrounded by white, whereas that same value here doesn't look as dark as it does there because it's surrounded by a mid-tone green. Okay, so everything is super relative in anything visual value and color-wise. So putting down that base and covering that up is going to help me more judge it more relatively. Okay, so I'm going to start with my shadows. Let's mix up a shadow color. Looking back to week 1 when we talked about brushes, got a few brushes here. I'm going to start with, since this is a big area down here, a medium-sized soft brush. And then I've got my coarse brushes, which will be able to pick up more paint. And as we get into the lights, we want to have it build up in thickness. Kind of like you'll notice in here how I did with the abstraction of the leaves, which is not done by the way, but I just brought this up to a level where I wanted to start jumping in here and fixing some of these edges of the leaves while they're still wet. But you can see how I did it darker or thinner in the darks, and then as we get towards the lights, it gets a little bit thicker. We want to do the same thing from the shadows to the lights in the skin tone. So I've got kind of a medium-sized soft brush. I can either just mix directly, or if I want to keep it clean, I can use a palette knife. And let's mix up that dark. So I'm looking at my reference, and let's just start down here. Now, I played with the color balance in my mock-up a little bit to simulate some bounce light, and I might not even had to do it as that much because I was literally holding this in. I was like sitting in the nature. So a lot of that green's kicking in there. So, just don't paint it black. Shadows have a lot of color and actually a lot of light in them. They often pick up the surroundings. So that's going to be the green of the forest, or it might, there'll be a cool light source for my skin tones. So that's going to push the shadows a little bit warmer, remember, relatively. So that's why this underpainting was another good choice, because it's going to keep it warm. So I'm looking down here at the shadow shape. It's a dark shadow, so good, match that value. It's going to be warm compared to the coolness of the daylight, and it's going to have some green in it from all of the reflected color and light of the foliage. So that's a lot of information when it comes to judging and mixing a color. Like, where do I go? That's going to help me choose that. So remember, value first. So let's start over here. Okay, I'm gonna hold off on using those colors for now. But let's just mix. And I set up my palette kind of light to dark, yellow, red, blue in value, just to maintain that value structure. That's why I put this light blue down here, not up here, because it's closer to being a light value white than it is like a dark value blue. So when I'm mixing, as best you can, just organize your palette. I usually try and keep like shadows up here, background stuff down here. If this is a big palette, but if I had a lot smaller, it's important to keep it organized. So shadow shapes up here, or shadow values and colors, mid-tones, lights, really bright highlights, background and clothing. Generally, it's very up to you. As long as you know and it doesn't become a big mess. Usually a clean palette leads to a clean painting. Okay, so I'm going to start mixing over here. That's going to be way too dark and way too cold. I'm going to grab a little bit of my warmest color. Remember, blue plus red gives us the secondary violet. It's not what we want. We want it to go green. So we're going to grab some of our yellow. In effect, the yellow is going to neutralize it and turn it into a brown. Which is what we kind of want, because that shadow, it is a very brown, because it's warm. It's a brown, green, dark color. So I'm kind of grabbing, as I'm mixing this, I'm grabbing more yellow, more blue. So I know I want it to be green in the end. And then a little bit of red just to keep it warm, because I don't want it to go too cold. Because I'm looking at the light, and the light's a very cool color from the daylight. And so there's this rule, which is hard to kind of see at first, but once you see it, you can't not see it. But there's this rule of contrast where whatever your light source is, the shadows are going to be the opposite. Even if that's super subtle, even if it's like almost a neutral light source, the shadows are going to be the opposite of whatever that is. So if the light source is slightly cool, the shadows will be slightly warm. And it's called simultaneous contrast. And so in outdoor figures or outdoor anything, if it's not in sunlight, if it's in daylight, which is cool because of the blue color of the sky, then the shadows are going to be relatively warmer. If you're in direct sunlight, bright yellows and oranges, then your shadows are going to pick up that reflected light of the day, the daylight in the sky, and it's going to cool the shadows down, plus a simultaneous contrast makes it extra cool. That's why plein air painting can be so beautiful, or painting the figure outdoors can be beautiful, because this contrast gets so heightened. And so I want to keep that in mind, and I don't want to let this shadow color run cold, or the whole painting will look cold. It'll be a cold shadow with a cold light, and there won't be that kind of simultaneous contrast effect that is so nice in the vibrancy. It kind of vibrates. So that's not bad. A little bit warmer. Now, a kind of an advanced technique. Well, I did already mention it, but it's keeping your blacks thin, taking that to the next level of almost transparent like this is a way to just make them recede. You want the shadows to recede, and you want the lights to come forward. So you do that with really thin transparent paint and really thick impastos. So there's nothing wrong with this color that I have here. It's getting pretty close to what I want. But for how I've done the last painting, and I want this to stay in that realm, I need to use I want to use more of these transparent pigments to get this same value and color, but it's very opaque because these two colors are very opaque. And so this is the right color to put down here. It's just going to be very thick and not translucent. So there's nothing wrong with this. If you're going to paint opaquely, that's perfect. But I'm going to mix up that same color. I'm just going to mix it up with, instead of that yellow ochre, some of this Indian yellow, maybe some of this. And I'll probably need to grab a little bit of opacity just to lighten it, because it's just going to look black. But overall, I just want it to be a little bit more glazy. And then as I start to move towards this light spot, I'm going to add more of these opaques back in. But I wanted to show you that the same color, hue and value, can be matched. It's just not going to be transparent. And I need it to be to match my other paintings. That's how I painted the other one, was with a lot of transparencies. So I don't want to make this one too different in aesthetic. Get a touch more blue. Get that green going. Now I put it down there and it's surrounded by all these really warm colors, so it feels a little bit cold. But when I look at it up here, surrounded by the gray, that's the importance of the gray palette, it looks warm enough. I'm kind of stuck there. So I'm just going to warm it up a tad. I don't know whether to trust myself and just pull ahead, push ahead. Okay, so it's almost the same color. It's just, I think, a little bit more transparent. Okay, so probably could have mixed up more of that. But let's apply that now. So I've got my soft brush. See how it kind of has a little bit of transparency, a little glow to it. And then I'm going to try and match this value down here, but in the correct color. Now I can come in here, and this paint from the leaf abstraction is still wet, so we can just kind of soften that edge. Especially since that leaf is rolling right there, and so I don't want it to pop forward. Maybe up here I can pull out a little bit so it pops forward, or this highlight, I can come back in with an opaque light. Okay, and then we're tiling. I'm kind of putting down an average, but also thinking about it's going to be rolling to the left, and it's going to be rolling towards my chest right here, so it's picking up some lights bouncing off that, and it's warming up ever so slightly. So now I have this average here. I can just grab a little bit of my lighter red, not my darker red. So I need a little bit more light, a little bit more warmth. Mix it in. Maybe too much red, maybe a little yellow. More, a bit bigger of a jump. And then, so that's turning towards the left there. And then as it comes up towards my Adam apple and into the light a little bit more, it's not quite light, it's still in the shadow, so it's picking up actually some greens. So I'm going to grab a little bit of the blues, a little bit of my lighter blue because it is getting lighter. So see, I'm kind of working off of this average that I've created here. A lot of the painting goes on here. You're mixing and matching here, and then you're kind of redrawing over here. So see how that's just a little value step different? Kind of coming up on that Adam's apple out of the shadow. Not all tiles are the same width and length, right? So we're kind of, it's almost thinking planarly. As much as you can, mix, match, and place, and leave alone. Trust yourself. Again, like I said, this is going to be a little bit off because it's surrounded by all these warmths. So trust as much as you can up here. As it goes up onto the Adam's apple, which is right below here, it's going to get quite a bit lighter and a little bit more yellow. So grabbing some light. Now that's weight. You can see the contrast there is nothing like up there. So just grab a little bit of it. That's feeling better. And I'm squinting down a lot here because I'm trying to see through, I'm trying to get the average of value and color down there and not draw all of the individual hairs. I'm just looking for the biggest, simplest statement here. Now it feels maybe a little bit cool, but the coolness, the blueness of the coolness is pushing it green, which isn't a bad thing. It's kind of making it live in that environment. a little bit, so that's okay. We can always come back and adjust that once we get more put down. Now it gets a little bit darker where you're seeing through more of the hair just picking up. So, and the hair, just because it's kind of in that shadow, all of the heat of kind of that's inherent in the deep darks of the skin is kind of pushing through. That's why this was so nice. So I'm going to go off of this shadow average still, maybe just add some of my transparent red, and then a little bit of blue because I don't want it to be like hot. And then coming off of this average again. Nice and thin. Warming and darkening all at the same time. A little bit too cool. Okay. This is good. And that starts up here, goes down here. Now that might be a little dark. Kind of feather it into that color, and then maybe mix it actually into that color because I'm liking that. Just to subdue the darkness. There we go. Feeling a little bit cold, so grabbing a little more transparent red. That makes it a little bit too dark, so there's a little bit of blue, light blue to lighten it. There we go. And that kind of trails itself all the way up here. And you're going to have the tendency, and I've been doing a poor job of showing it, but to just blend and blend and blend. The more you can mix up here and place and leave it alone, even if it looks choppy, you'll be amazed by the time you get this whole thing turned, and then you work up here and you start turning these minor forms, how your eye just smooths it all out, kind of like pixels. It just kind of smooths it all out, and it holds on to that sense of form. If everything is blended super soft, it just kind of gets a little bit not muddied, but just like blobby almost. So it's okay to have some of these like edges in here if you keep your values close enough. But there's a little bit of difference. That's okay. It's going to look really nice and modeled versus just kind of like fan brushed. For the longest time, I would just put down colors and then just fan them together, and I was like, I almost developed painter's elbow from just constant, and it was boring and they looked blobby. So this is the way to do it, is tiling. So I'm going to continue through here, get to here, and then maybe I'll speed it up when I get up here. Okay, so let's continue. So I carried that because I saw about the same value and color all the way through here. So I'm going to look now moving to the right a little bit more. It's what's the difference from like this color that I have, this color, and then the color I'm about to put down. This one's darker than that. That one's lighter and yellow than that. This one's lighter and cooler. So if we have, this was, sorry, can't see this. This was what we decided was the Adam's apple. Let's grab a little bit of the, I don't think it's going to be that much colder, so I'm just going to grab some white because that is cooler than the color I have down. Mix up this new batch. And then I'm losing a little bit of the green, so I'm going to grab some blue. Now that is too bright. It actually feels like it goes over here. Now I have something to aim for over here. Let's get back in here. I'm going to grab some yellow, maybe some my dark red because it's getting a little bit too bright. I want to darken it. It's these subtleties. It's like, it's such a subtle game of not even color, but temperature. And what I mean by temperature is the lightness, or I'm sorry, the coolness or the warmth of it. So, you know, these are our warm colors, these four, and then these three are cool colors, the blue and the white. Yellows and the reds and these kind of oranges are warm colors. And they're very warm and very cold. In the skin tones, it's all kind of a mixture of browns and grays, no matter what the skin tone. So you're just pushing like a little bit, and it's usually not just one color. So you can see I've kind of dabbed into all of these. So it's just a subtle mixture of, okay, I'm turning towards the light, so I have to get lighter. I also have to get cooler because it's a cool light source, but maybe not that cool, maybe not that light, not that quick. So I have to go back in, darken, and warm it back up. And just to reiterate, soft brush for the shadows because it's applying the paint very thinly. And I want that for this section. Now it kind of, where the, is that the trachea? Where that kind of, it bumps out and then it kind of dips back in and then it comes out. So it's going to get a little bit brighter here and then a little darker and then start to get bright before it actually turns into light. These are all kind of half tones, really subtle. So I'm going to go from this color to right in there, which is a little bit lighter, not as cold as that. Ooh, so that feels good. That white is actually pulling out the yellow and the warmth of it a little bit, so that might work. And I am probably oversimplifying these value jumps a little bit. The slower you can go, the better. Maybe when I speed up the video, I'll slow down so it won't be as boring for you to watch, but you'll see how more subtle I'll take this, but just for sake of time. And then I said it gets a little bit darker, and some of the green of the leaf, I have this green left over up here. It's actually just a mixture of these two. I'm just going to grab a little bit of green, mix that into this kind of half tone right here. See, so it just gets a little darker. Oh, it's important, I don't know if you can see this, I'm wiping every time I move from a section or a tile or a plane, I'm cleaning my brush. Okay, and then this coolness kind of picks up a little bit of that yellow, maybe a little bit more brown as it blends into the hair. Here. Now we're all, you can see the underpainting, and I'm looking at the reference, and we're almost to the point where we're actually turning into light. So remember, cool light source, and then this is where a lot of the color shifts actually happen. You know, a lot of times, depending on the harshness or the brightness of the lights will blow out any color, so they'll just wash them out. The shadows will obscure them. So you kind of get all these like really gorgeous color shifts in here. Sometimes hard to capture on a camera, a lot easier to see in life when your eye is constantly flipping back and forth from light and shadow. We get all these really fun effects in here. So what's going to happen, and what you'll often see, is if it's a cool light source, it's the cool light source is turning into the shadow shape, and it might flick cool right before it bumps into the warm shadow shape. Or you might get some of these like greens like popping right next to that shadow line, or you might get some really hot shadows bumped up against the cool lights. It all kind of rolls into that simultaneous contrast. I'm seeing on the reference that it's kind of more half-tony flesh color, so kind of your go-to for mine is just meat cad red, yellow ochre, white. This kind of orangey color, but then I'm going to cool it off because it is in cool light, so that's feeling good. And then maybe bump it up a little bit of warm. So I see some of the reddiness coming through there. See, and now you can see I'm kind of, this might be where the light, probably should put my average light up here. And this side's up here. Now when I put it up there, it seems warm up here, but really cold there. So I'm going to go in and just add a little bit of warm transition. Another tile to help roll it into shadow. You can see I'm just matching the values I've already got down and just thinking about this temperature now. that same kind of half tone. It's coming through here. And then give a little bit of that green, cool green. I forgot to put it down here. Okay, now we're rolling even further into light, so you can switch to a little bit coarser of a brush. You're gonna be able to pick up a little bit more, but you can actually see the thickness of the paint there a little bit more. That's too bleached out, so I'm just adding. Remember, we're cool light source, so the white actually is lightening and cooling at the same time. I think that's often forgotten, is that the white is cool. So when you're lightening, you don't always just want to put white in your flesh tones because it can make them chalky. In this case, we're outdoors and the light is very cold, so it's actually a perfect thing to add, but that's not always the case. Okay, so it's reaching kind of the pinnacle or the brightest spot, at least here it is, and then it starts to turn back into shadow up here, so I'm just reaching and grabbing some of that halftone again, pulling it down here, observing how it's rolling back in the space up here. And we have kind of the inverse reaction on this backside here. As it's rolling back, it's picking up. I'm seeing a little bit of some blues and greens. Back into that yellow. Warmth of the shadow. I got a little bit too dark, so let's see if it needs a little bit more yellow. See how, even though I'm kind of rushing this, how slow going this is, but this is really how you build the form. And then see, this was a little bit too dark in my underpainting. So I can correct that now. Need more paint. I see kind of, it's an off-white, and I think it's leaning towards violet, so I'm just grabbing my medium red and my dark blue and a lot of white. So it's kind of a dull pink, but leaning towards maudy violet. And that comes all the way down to that loose edge. Okay, and then for the highlight, usually the highlight isn't the color, or isn't white, it's actually the color of the light. I don't even think I'm reaching the highlight down here, so I'm just trying to build up the thickness of paint a little bit more. Not just using pure white though. When I get to it, the highlight up in here, I think, well, maybe I'll catch it here. Definitely catch it here, maybe here. I'll probably go in with this light blue. It might not be my lightest value, my highlight value, but having some of the temperature of the actual color of the sky is really going to help. Okay, so I hope that made sense. You know, I started from my shadow area, looked for the average shadow there, thought about, you know, the color of the light source, cool light, warm shadow, thought about the reflected light, or color bouncing in there, so making a little bit green, and then working out of that towards the reflected light, kind of lightening it, but not very much, just a little bit, And then as we work our way over, just seeing how it changes. It's getting lighter. It's probably getting lighter. Unless you have like a strong core shadow, it might get lighter and then get darker again. And then when you get towards the light source, if it's a cool light source, if it's cooling off, and then just keep tiling. Trying not to blend them as much as you can. Trying just to stack those tiles. At the very end, if you get the whole thing covered, like this is kind of choppy, but I might leave it and then keep going like this. And then at the end, if I look back and go, you know what, there's too sharp of an edge, it's grabbing my attention, soften it. But I think you'll find that it's acceptable. So I thought those overpainting oil techniques were important to show, but I realized a lot of you guys don't have oil paints at home. So for this video, I just want you to do a quick drawing. You can do it from any photograph, any subject matter. Mother's Day is coming up, so I'm going to do a quick drawing of my mom's favorite children, her 2 dogs. And we're going to do a line drawing for this supplement assignment, and then in the next video, we'll just do a quick watercolor over the top of it. And just like oil paint, I'm sure a lot of you don't have oil paints at home, but I figured we could use things we find around the house. We could steep some tea bags, or even I found some soy sauce in my fridge, so that could work as well. But for just this assignment of this video, just do a quick line sketch. I'll do this one really quickly. Nothing new here, but I do want to emphasize the importance of having a nice foundational drawing moving into a watercolor. There is direct watercolor where you just go straight with watercolor, but I find it more effective to break down the process into a drawing first, because watercolor can be a little bit more unforgiving than oil paint, right? Oil paint, we can't go in with impastos over the top to get our lights back. We really have to conserve the white of the paper. So when I do this drawing, I'm going for the proportions, just like we did with the oil painting, but I'm also going to be looking for the light shadow and then like circling where the white of the paper cannot get covered up with any paint, because as soon as I lose that white of the paper, can't get it back. So I'm just gonna do a quick drawing. You guys can do a quick drawing from your own reference, and then next video we'll dive into some watercolor techniques.